our speaker today, just very briefly, Pam Coral Bennett, and she has spoken here before. And as you know, she is an associate professor at the Ohio State University. And she has spoken all over the world, and I think she's been in South Korea, China, Turkey, and Greece, has been an international speaker. And she's also has a very widely recognized book, and I think that's Gardenpedia, From A to Z, and I think you have an opportunity to get one that's out front. So Pam, thank you for being here again.
Thank you.
You have a good program. We welcome you to the city of Centerville.
Thank you. Do I need this one? Thank you. I really appreciate that. So if I do this right, is everybody ready for the eclipse? Be a little bigger. There we go. Full eclipse. We're excited about it, but I'm not going anywhere, that's for sure. And I guess I'm back by popular demand, and that's not because it's me, but because it's the topic that is popular and is being demanded by a lot of people. There we go. See how far my string goes. Topic of hydrangeas. How many of you have hydrangea? How many of you have an old hydrangea that your grandma or aunt or somebody had years ago? The big old snowball. Yeah, those are still around too. And those are still nice. But as I was talking to the young ladies at the library, and I told them to make sure I don't steal this book, this is an old book. Anybody guess what year it was done? Old book on hydrangeas. 70s? 1991. That's old. And the reason it's old, now the content is all good. The content is good, except for when it comes to varieties. Because the varieties, there were only 2 or 3 varieties in there that are still on the market today. Breeding with hydrangeas has gone haywire. It's absolutely insane. And every time they come up with something new, they find something better within the next few years. And it's a popular plant, so it's no wonder. I mean, it looks beautiful. It's got lots of blooms, big color, easy to take care of for the most part. So it is a popular plant, so that's why the breeding is really heavy on it right now. So we're going to talk about hydrangeas, and I did get a promotion last year, so I'm now full professor. Oh. Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That means I don't have to do any more work, right? I can just smooth on out. So we're going to talk about hydrangeas, and the go.osu hydrangea fact sheet, you can find the actual fact sheet on growing hydrangeas, all the details. So you're going to see this chart, and again, you can go to go.osu, it's just a shortened URL, go to hydrangea chart and get this same thing. It's got all the extra information that I may not refer to today, okay? So let's go through the chart first. So features of the hydrangeas are listed below. So we go through each of the varieties and then talk about, and Eric Barrett, one of my colleagues, who is actually going for promotion for full professor this year, is created this chart and wrote the fact sheet and did the development of this PowerPoint. But he has gone through and picked out varieties, cultivars that are available, information, and so forth. However, as I go through this chart, and he did this in 2020 or 21, it's already outdated because some of the varieties are not sold anymore because they've got better varieties. How many of you have a limelight hydrangea? That's old. I'm getting ready to dig mine out and put new ones in because there's new varieties. And that's what's really hard as a gardener, because we get these great varieties and then more come on, so we have to have more, right? So we're going to go through this chart to talk a little bit about the species of hydrangeas. So the first one on the left, Hydrangea arborescens. This is your smooth hydrangea. And then the other one that you don't see, I'm not going to talk too much about, you don't see too much, and I doubt that anybody has one, maybe, is the silverleaf, Hydrangea radiata. That's the silverleaf hydrangea, so very few people would have that. Quercifolia, a lot of people have oak leaf hydrangea. It is a good old standard, it's been around a long time. It was in that book, but the varieties were not necessarily the same that we have today. The next one you have, Macrophylla, is the big leaf. This is the one that you all have problems with. This is the one that you can't get to come back and bloom again like it's supposed to. It's supposed to bloom twice a year. We're going to talk more in detail about that. And then it's also the mountain hydrangea, Hydrangea serrata. This is the new up-and-coming hydrangea. This is the one people are going to start wanting because of the new cultivars that they have today. Then we have Hydrangea animala, and it's usually variety petiolaris, which is the climbing hydrangea. Does anybody have that? Isn't that nice? Got to have a big support for that, right? Because it's very, very heavy. And then the last one, which is kind of probably the most popular, which Limelight and some of the others, the paniculata hydrangeas. And that's because of their panicles, the shape of those flowers. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of those. We are going to touch on the most difficult topic with hydrangeas, and that is what? Pruning. When to prune, how to prune, absolutely. So here's all your species, all your types. These are flowers, not a type of hydrangea. It is a type of flower. So you could have a macrophylla lace cap. You could also have a macrophylla mop head. So this just describes the type of flowers. So lace cap on the right, sterile flowers and infertile flowers. And on the left, you usually have more fertile flowers than sterile flowers. So you have mop heads, the big ball type, big fuzzy ones, and then lace cap, which are really cool. And the center flowers are the ones that are fertile, but they have very few of the big petal flowers, but they're still very cool in terms of their appearance. So if plants are in the right place and they look good, these are your typical bloom times. So you start with smooth, they're earlier, but they're supposed to be blooming twice. And again, I'm going to talk about why you're not getting two sets of blooms. So they're supposed to bloom in the spring, the first time, and then again in the summer, the second time. Oak leaf will bloom June, and then big leaf will start blooming late June into September. Climbing hydrangeas blooms in May, June, and panicle starts in July and the rest of the season. Now, you can see in the blue, faded times if they're in AM sun and PM shade. Hydrangeas do best in that morning sun, afternoon shade. They're going to struggle a little bit in that hot afternoon sun, I mean. And that is, you know, if we have 70-degree days for 6, 7, 8 days in a row when daffodils are blooming, they're going to shoot through their bloom very quickly. They're not going to look very good for a long period. But if it's cooler, they're going to last longer. So the same thing with hydrangeas. If they're in that shade in the heat of the afternoon, their blooms are going to fade slower and they're going to look better for a longer period of time. They can take full hot sun. I've got several in full hot sun, but they will wilt during the heat of the day. The leaves will just kind of look wilted. They may perk back up in the evening when it gets cool, but they just don't like that full hot sun. They have a very shallow root system, and you've probably found that out by trying to go in and maybe do some weeding or hoeing, and all of a sudden, oops, you just dug up one of their roots. So it is a very shallow root system. The great thing about hydrangeas is they're not just a one and done plant. They look good when they're in full bloom, but many of them have faded blooms that are just spectacular. So even the faded blooms look pretty, and even in the winter months, they may look nice as well. This one on the left is vanilla strawberry, and the right is limelight. And as vanilla strawberry starts to color up, it'll just start to show pink flowers. Then it gets this beautiful pink on it. And then by October, it has that really dark maroon. And on limelight, you can see it's kind of a pinkish. This is on the north side of a house. So it's in the shade pretty much all day. Does get some sun. But the colors will last clear up until a really hard freeze. And then even at that point in time, they don't look bad. This is our hydrangea garden at Snyder Park Gardens and Arboretum. And we have we added 13, we have 36 different varieties in here at this time. We do have limelight in here because we planted this back in 2016, I think it was, 2016. And we still have limelight in here. So we'll probably leave it in here because we are a garden and arboretum, we're a display garden. So even in the winter months, you're going to see some kind of appearance, you know, you're going to get something out of them. And I used to have mine right behind my window of my great room because that's where we spent a lot of time in the winter. So it's nice to have that appearance there in the winter months. How big were your snowball hydrangeas that your grandma used to have? Yeah, huge blooms. How tall were they? I can remember my grandma was in a small urban lot in Springfield, and it was probably 15 feet tall, huge round shrub. And today's are much, much different than that. And even with limelight, there's little lime. because the trend now for most all plants, urban gardens are small. Urban gardeners want to have these plants, but they don't have the space. And people just don't want to deal with these large overgrown plants that they have to prune. So the trend in annuals, perennials, shrubs, a lot of dwarf and compact plants, much smaller, much more suited for a small urban garden. So this is just proven winners who probably, I would say, are the ones leading a lot of the breeding going on in hydrangeas. Incredible 4 to 5 feet, and then down to incredible wee white, clear down on this end, 1.5 to 3 feet. So much smaller, but they're not sacrificing flowers. There's still a ton of flowers on this small plant. So they're breeding, they're crossing, they're coming up with the best ones available, but they're coming up with nice, short, compact ones. In your paniculatas, you've got Bobo, 2.5 feet, all the way up to Firelight, which is 4 to 5 feet. Limelight, 6 to 8 feet, although I've got some limelight in the front yard that are probably almost 12 feet by now. If they're in a good location, they're going to be bigger and healthier and so forth. If they're in a really hot, dry location, they may be a little smaller, a little more compact. Notice we have ours located underneath these sycamore trees. So we looked for a location that was going to get some sun, maybe some morning sun, but this is at Snyder Park Gardens and Arboretum. It used to be the former golf course, Snyder Park Golf Course in Springfield. And this is where we have all of our varieties. The panicled varieties are over here. Oak leaves are back here, the lace caps, and then we have our macrophyllus over in this area. All different sizes, all different varieties, and this is why it's a good idea when you look at a hydrangea, try to figure out how big is that going to get? What is my space? What is my location? How much area do I have? And do I have the right location for it to be healthy? One of the things about hydrangeas, particularly when we get into the ones that you want to be blue. Anybody have blue hydrangeas? How much work does it take for you to keep it blue? We're going to talk about that too. It is work to keep them blue if you want them blue, or you can move to Pittsburgh and they'll be perfectly blue, right? It's all about soil pH, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that, but soil testing is really important. How many of you have done a soil test? Okay. Why have the rest of you not done a soil test? Procrastinator? You haven't had a problem? Because most home gardeners test the soil when there's a problem. There must be a problem. Soil testing is very helpful for hydrangeas. They do like nutrients, a lot of nutrients. You will see this chlorosis in this case. You see some burn here, the intraveinal chlorosis that you see here. If you're starting to see some of these things on your plants, more fertilizer is not the answer. Figure out what's going on with your soil. What is your pH? What's the availability of the nutrients in our soils? Because we have really good soil, believe it or not. I think I had that in my column this morning. We have good soil. It's just compacted, unfortunately. But clay soil holds a lot of good nutrients for plants. So that the only way you're going to know what your soil is a soil test with pH and with what your nutrients might be in that particular soil. So we're going to talk about the 5 main types that we have here in Ohio that we usually see. First two, as mentioned, arborescens is the smooth hydrangea, and radiata is the silverleaf. So arborescens, it is native to North America. If you go into Clifton Gorge, John Bryan, George Rogers, any of these natural areas that we have, we'll see the native hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens. Not very pretty, not very big, not a lot of color. But if you do any of these hikes right now, you will notice the dead blooms that are on them and the new leaves that are starting to come out. So these were the precursor to all the great ones that we have. They're easy to propagate. Hydrangea stems, just lay them down, take either a hanger or a hook of some type, put them into the ground, cover that with soil, and they will root right there at the stem. So they're super easy to propagate and give to other people. The older varieties that we have, the older ones, when it says treat it like a perennial, it means like right now in the spring, go in and cut it back down to the crown of the plant. It's going to be more compact and not as overgrown. The newer varieties, you don't have to. Many of the newer varieties, you don't have to cut back, you don't have to prune. They pretty much go on their own. And they are, like I said, they're the ones that bloom in late May and June. Now, with the arborescens and with our paniculatas, if you prune them this time of the year, back to the crown, okay, you are going to have a much shorter, more compact plant. But you will also have a plant with larger blooms, okay? If you don't prune them and you let them go, you'll have a taller plant, smaller blooms, but more of them. Now, the one downside to something like this is if they get to that point where they're really big blooms, what happens? Yeah, they flop over. You get a good rainstorm, a good windstorm, just knocks them down. So depending on what you want or where it's located, you can treat this as a perennial, as we are here on the left, and cutting it back right now before it leaves out. Or let it go on the right-hand side and have more blooms, but they'll be smaller. Yes?
Is that Annabelle?
This one? Yeah, it probably is. No, Annabelle is not the wild one, and Annabelle is in this book. It is an old, and when I say old, 1991, it is probably one of the first big flowered perennial or hydrangeas that has been on the market. And this goes clear back to the 90s, early 90s, when we had this available to sell at garden centers. Large flowers. Annabelle is more compact than the species. So it is a little bit more compact. And they've done a lot with Annabelle. So Annabelle genetics are in a lot of the newer varieties because it was a really good plant. So Incredible is Annabelle. Annabelle is one of the parents, but it's crossed with something else to get this Incredible. But look at the difference in the amount of flowers on Incredible. So again, the breeding has, with everything, they just keep improving on this. Lots of blooms if you, again, prune it back and limit the number of stems. Not pruning, you're going to have lots of blooms, but they're not going to be as big. Just really pretty. It starts blooming in June, July, goes through for a while, keeps its color, kind of fades, looks good if it's in the shade, but eventually it's going to get those dead brown flower heads. Another one, Invincible Ruby. So Ruby is about 3 to 4 foot tall, nice colors. Again, these are the mop head types. This is arborescens. And there are some shorter, more compact ones, such as Mini Mauvette, Garnetta, and Wee White. Wee White was the one that was clear on that far side. So you can get them anywhere from 1.5, 2 feet, all the way up to 5 feet. So these are the arborescens. This is a good shot, good close-up shot of the colors. And again, the ruby red, the pinks, the really deep purplish colors as they fade. Another one is Hayes Starburst, just another smooth hydrangea. If you look at the flowers, they have like little starburst effect. You also notice a fence in this case. What is that fence for? Deer. It will keep it from flopping, but this one doesn't flop as much, but deer like hydrangeas. Does anybody have any problems with them? Particularly the young ones in the early spring when they're just starting to come up. They like to nibble on the new, fresh, tender green foliage. So deer can be a problem on hydrangeas if you have them. So you might want to keep that in mind. This is a lace cap, and this is where I'm saying some of the new stuff. It's really cool. Invincible lace. It has the purplish fertile flowers and the little petals then around the outside, and it gets around 3 to 4 feet tall. Then we have radiata, and does anybody have one of these? I'd love to get a cutting of this if somebody had one. The cool part about this, the flower heads aren't exactly the biggest and most interesting, but it's the underside of the leaf is that silver color. So people really like that silverish color because when it flaps in the wind, you get that nice silver appearance. And you can see there are bees on the fertile flowers. They do attract pollinators. And not just bees, bumblebees, honeybees, but a lot of our native bees. You'll see little tiny bees flying around them when they're in bloom. So many of our hydrangeas are indeed good for pollinators. On to the next one, the quercifolia. I love these. How many of you have an oak leaf hydrangea? Oh, aren't they beautiful? They have more than one season interest for sure. So this one's called Snowflake, just a really cool flower. Here is Snowflake in full bloom. They have the panicle type flowers, the shape of the panicle type flowers. They also are very prone, and not just this one, but other ones are prone. If you look closely, you see a leaf spot disease. Has anybody ever lost a hydrangea to leaf spot disease? No. It will not kill the plant. In a wet, damp situation, and remember, if we have these in shade, you have more moisture on the leaf surface. you might see the leaf spot disease develop. And some varieties are definitely more prone than others. I don't worry too much about it. It's not worth trying to spray because of timing. Timing is very critical. And again, it will not kill the plant. So when you see the leaf spot disease, usually it's just a purplish spot surrounded by a yellow halo. And it's not that big of a problem. The other thing we sometimes see with hydrangeas are called leaf tire caterpillars. Has anybody ever seen these? You have a leaf that's just kind of rolled up. And if you open that leaf up, you'll see a caterpillar on the inside. That is not going to be a big deal either because you can just take that leaf off and get rid of it. So as far as pests go, hydrangeas are really minimal in terms of pest problems. It's more cultural problems that cause problems for people growing hydrangeas. This is what snowflake does as it ages. So again, yeah, the color that you see, the beautiful purples and mauves, as it ages just look fantastic, and it'll last like that almost all season long and into the winter months. Then in the winter, it turns, of course, brown. There's a mature snowflake about 4 feet to 5 feet tall. Another one called Alice, and you can see the difference in the petals. They're not double petals, they're single petals. This is Alice, a little shorter, more compact with faded flowers. Gatsby Star, Gatsby Moon, and Gatsby Gal is one of the series that came out from one of the companies. So they put all these together, called it the Gatsby series, and it just basically is different flowers, different flower heads on them. Snow Queen has been around a while, although it's not in that book. Snow Queen is one of the standards. Notice that this is in a shade area. Oak leaf tends to do a little bit better with shade. Full sun, it will not give you the rich colors. It will fade out faster. But you get that rich, deep green of the foliage and you get the beautiful, crisp, white flowers on Snow Queen. So the other great thing about quercifolias, the oak leaf hydrangeas, they have beautiful fall color. They're really the only one of hydrangeas that give you any fall color because the rest of them, that hasn't come along, but I wouldn't be surprised if breeding on fall color would be something that we might see next. But that's beautiful fall foliage and it holds on until you get like maybe into December. It's just, the leaves stick on for a long time. This is Pee-wee, not my dog. The Pee-wee is in the back. I updated this whole PowerPoint yesterday or this week, and I just gone through old pictures and found my old dog, Snoop. There's Pee-wee, 4 feet tall. So I had a small location. I didn't have enough room for the species quercifolia, which can get 6 to 7 feet tall. So selecting Pee-wee was perfect because it stayed right in that area. I never pruned it. Never pruned it. I never had to prune it because it stayed this size the entire time. So that's Pee-wee. There's Pee-wee going into the winter months. And the nice thing too, you can't really tell from pictures or from a distance, but they do have peeling orangish bark. So you get that kind of flaky bark to it. So it also has a really nice bark on our oak leaf hydrangeas. There's Sykes Dwarf and Pee-wee. Pee-wee does have much nicer fall color. I mean, I need to take it out because we put a patio in, but I love that thing in terms of fall color. When we took it out and transplanted it, it's now in full sun and it doesn't look anything like this. So that shade on the north side of the house was just perfect for it. Full sun is not perfect for it. But Sykes Dwarf, Compact, and Pee-wee, neither one of these have been pruned. So these are excellent and they're on the market. You'll find them pretty much, I think very easily. Excellent hydrangeas for a small area for shade. I would not put these in the sun. Macrophylla, your big leaf. This is the mysterious one. Everybody wants to know, why doesn't it bloom? Because it's supposed to bloom in the spring and it's supposed to bloom in the summer, right? You're supposed to have 2 blooms per season. And then Serrata, as I mentioned, the mountain hydrangea, this is where you're going to see a lot of new cool stuff come along. So the original one that came out, Michael Durr, I believe, one of our great plantsmen, found this one, Nico Blue, definitely in Pennsylvania. It would stay that blue. It was the precursor to all of our Macrophylla hydrangeas. And it was pretty, but we would not have that blue color here in Ohio. Then after that came Endless Summer. How many of you had Endless Summer? And you bought it, why? Because it was supposed to bloom as, oh, this one's going to bloom forever. Get it in the spring and it's going to bloom. Get it in the summer. Has anybody had an Endless Summer that's that tall? Yeah, never. Yes? You do? What do you do?
It's just luck.
It loves its spot.
Okay, all right. Got it in the right spot. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about methods and things you can do to hopefully encourage the height. So in the summer, it's really an interesting story. Michael Duray mentioned he was at one of our state conferences years ago, and I happened to have dinner with him, and we sat there, and I said, okay, because endless summer had been out for a while, and nobody likes it. It's just like, this thing won't grow, it dies back, it's awful. And he discovered it, and he went to Bailey's Nursery, and they propagated it, and they marketed it and sold thousands, so they made lots of money on it. And he probably made good money on it too. I said, so tell me the story about endless summer. And he's like, it's a dog. But he made money on that dog, but it truly, after, in Georgia, where he's from, it looked great. But put it in the Midwest, where we get cold winters, it's a dog. And then I always laugh because all these landscapers put these at these really harsh commercial areas. This is at a McDonald's. And, oh man, did it look beautiful that year. I had to stop and I'm like, I got to get a picture of this. Look at this. Well, they are no longer there, but they look so good that first year. And they look good when you go to the garden centers and you buy them because they're beautiful. My daughter-in-law bought one and it's not there anymore either. Double Delight's perfection, and look at the double flowers on this one. So they can be single flowers, they can be double flowers. Nice color on this one. Pink Shiraz, another more compact one, big flowers. So when they bloom, they're beautiful. This is an older one called Cloudy. It's a lace cap. So again, lace cap and mop heads are just flower types. You can have them in all the different species of hydrangeas. In the summer now has been bred several times because there are some good genes in it. There's really good genetics in the summer because of the flower and the flower power. So it was bred, and now it's Twist and Shout. Has anybody heard of Twist and Shout? It's pretty common on the market right now. But it's a lace cap, and it has really pretty flowers, and it's a short, more compact, about 3 to 4 feet, and it's a little bit hardier. It's a little bit hardier. So here's the secret for pruning. You've got to know what type of hydrangea you have. Do you have an arborescens? Do you have a macrophylla? Paniculata? Which one do you have? Arborescens blooms on new wood. So that's why the smooth hydrangea, that's why I can cut it back in the spring to the ground or to the crown, and it comes up and blooms on new wood. Okay? This one, macrophylla, blooms from old wood, but they found a species that if it overwinters, it will bloom in the spring on old wood and again on new wood. Okay, so it will bloom twice for you. However, what happens in the spring? You have winter kill. You have winter kill on the majority of these, and it kills last year's wood. Okay, so this is last year's wood, developed last summer, flowers developed last summer. It overwinters looking like, the leaves drop off and it overwinters as twigs with flower buds on it. But the cold kills the stems and the flower buds back to the ground. The plant still survives. You can get the plant to survive, cut it back, and then you've got new green growth, but when does that bloom? It does, but it blooms later in the summer on that new wood again. So you don't get that 2-season bloom that endless summer was really marketed for. 2 seasons of bloom. You get it in the spring, and then we don't get that first set of blooms on this. So in the spring, this is typically, if you have one of these macrophyllas, anybody have a macrophylla? Yeah, and it looks like this right now, except for those of you who are lucky enough to get it to grow. You see green down here. You may see some flowers on a stem or two, but not on all of them. So it just depends on how harsh the winter was. And this one again, you see growth down here. You see a few stems here, lots of growth here, but you don't see that full growth on the entire plant. This is last year's wood, and this should bloom this spring. Okay? So here's one that actually survived and has some growth on it. And if they let this grow, it's going to actually have blooms in the spring and then again in the summer months. So this is what we typically see with macrophyllus, okay? So there's no secret on pruning this one. If you have a macrophylla, the tops aren't coming out, prune them back because they're not, they're not going to grow. The new growth will come, and then you'll get blooms in the late, and I mean late summer, well, actually early summer. It's August. You tend to get the blooms, and they'll last into the fall. So the macrophyllas, you've got to kind of watch what you're getting, and in terms of location, I mean, mine are in a very protected location, very protected, underneath some shade trees on the one side of the house where there's not any wind or anything, a big green evergreen hedge behind it so it doesn't get that west wind, and they still die back each year. So you got to watch that on macrophyllas. This is what it looks like then in late summer or in August. Not as many blooms, not what it should be. So these are going to be eventually coming out and replaced with some of the newer varieties. And the serratas, the mountain hydrangeas, that's what I'm going to be putting in there because it looks okay. It's a nice lush green bush or shrub, but it's not what I want in that particular location. So in our zone, we're more of a zone 5, even though USDA says we're zone 6. I want to keep in mind those hardiness zones are based on averages, average low temperature for the last 30 years. Okay? So everybody gets excited, we're zone 6A, 6B now, we can grow more tropical plants. We can grow plants that will tolerate that. Well, we might, but will we have that winter like we had in 2012 or we had in 2014 or we had 2 years ago when it dropped down to below zero like 10, 20, 40 degrees in 2012? We might have that because it's an average of over 30 years. So we may get that, even though it says we're zone 6B now, it's not going to change what we can grow in terms of low potential temperatures, okay? So the roots are hardy to 5. That's why you get that green, beautiful shrub. It looks really nice. If the cultivar blooms only on old wood, it's going to be real sporadic because of the fact that the flower buds are killed. They're the ones I showed you where there's a little bit of green, but not a lot of green. So remontant means they bloom twice during the year. So they bloom on old wood and new wood. There are some lilacs that have been brought out lately that are remontant, means they bloom in the spring and then they bloom later on in the summer. And some of them have a full flush of blooms. Some of them just have a few blooms here and there. So that means they bloom on last year's wood and this year's wood. But again, perfect location, perfect soil and water, you're sometimes lucky. So those are you that have these growing and get that spring bloom, you are indeed lucky and have it in that right location. So think about when you look at macrophyllas. These are hydrangea macrophylla, big leaf hydrangeas. So when you go to the garden center, look at the tag and look to see what species it is. Hydrangea arborescens is smooth, Hydrangea paniculata, Hydrangea radiata, it would be Hydrangea macrophylla, and then question, okay, do I really want this? And then look to see if there are any cultivar trials where it's actually survived or thrived in our area. Because you may still, these are still out there and they're beautiful. Everybody loves them, especially Mother's Day. Wow, this is great. But macrophyllas are going to be a little more to take care of. Morning sun, afternoon shade, as I mentioned. Protected area on the north side of the house, but even though I've got mine in a really protected area, the house, the wind block, other trees, it still dies back every year. And then prepare the soil, good soil, well-drained soil. And then that winter protection may also be valuable. And I'll talk a bit about that. So when you want more blooms, pre-plant, choose a remontant variety. And there are varieties that are now much hardier, much better, much sturdier that will last and will bloom twice. Location, again, early emergence from dormancy. You know, when hellebores come out and start blooming in February, March, they can tolerate cold temperatures. But we had that really nice spell. If leaves started coming out in early March, when it was still cold, and then we got that cold drop, it's going to damage that new growth, that new leaf. And then near the lake, up around the lake, down in around the Ohio River, if you have a more temperate area. So if you have a microclimate on your property, that you have a little bit better temperate area, you might get by with planting them. And again, I can't stress enough that morning sun is okay. Evening, afternoon shade is really essential. If you can get it to survive in the fall, when you prune, down to 3 buds after the leaves fall. So in other words, like we used to tell people with roses, leave your roses up, but if they're really tall, prune them down a little bit to prevent that whipping. In this case, we're going to have you prune it back just a little bit, just to keep that plant a little bit below that really cold temperature level. May 10th, around May 10th, cut any dead stems back. So I always wait. I always, wait to cut them back because I'm thinking, okay, maybe it'll come back. Maybe it's going to grow, but it usually doesn't. But I wait until usually early May to get out there and start cutting any of those dead stems back. Avoid high nitrogen. High nitrogen levels on any of your hydrangeas are going to give you lots of foliage, but not so much flower. So honestly, I'll talk about fertilization, but sometimes they don't even need it. Then what we don't do, we do it maybe in our vegetable garden, barely. We don't water these on a regular basis. And that's okay. I don't water mine on a regular basis, and if the leaves wilt, I'm okay with that. But these are the things that you have to do with macrophylla if you want more blooms on them. So it's a lot of extra work. It's a lot of extra work in order to have these on macrophylla. Winter care. So you can cover with mulch, cover with maybe burlap around it, and put leaves down in there. So basically you're trying to moderate that temperature to prevent stem dieback and flower bud dieback. Now keep in mind, you might prevent flower or stem dieback, and you might have green leaves, but if the flower buds die, it's not going to happen. Same thing as when we go out and buy dogwoods that we get from the South. We buy dogwoods that are sourced out of Georgia, Tennessee. Those flower buds may not be hardy to our area, and we have a beautiful dogwood tree, but we may not have blooms because they're not hardy to our area. And again, like it says, cover for April frost. So you can do some extra work and protect it. So if you have one, you want to try it, see how much extra work, go right ahead. But for me, the ones I showed you, I'm done with them. I'm going to get better varieties in there. So mountain hydrangeas, I mentioned, this is the new up and coming. We're seeing a lot more breeding in this area. Mountain hydrangea species, the species is not all that pretty, but because they're crossing and crossing and crossing, they come up with really good ones. Bailey's is one of the biggest producers of hydrangeas, and they've got just acres and acres and acres of hydrangeas. They will cross them, they'll plant them out, and then they'll watch them for 3 or 4 years. And after 3 or 4 years, they'll pick the good ones, and they'll cross them again with something with a trait that they're looking for. They might be looking for a color trait, so they'll cross again. So there's a lot of breeding going on, a lot of crossing, but it also takes a lot of time, which is why hydrangeas are not cheap. You're going to pay for them. I really am high on these hydrangea serratas or mountain hydrangeas just because the new ones they're coming out with are really kind of cool flowers. This one is one called Tough Stuff Red. Just really a nice color, short, compact, 3 to 4 feet tall, and it is going to bloom again for you. It is going to come back and it's going to bloom. Now, when you see this TM trademark, that's trademarked for the name. So that name is trademarked. The species, or the cultivar rather, may have a different name, but Tough Stuff is the trademark name. Tough Stuff Aha. They have a whole list of them. So if you go in and look for Tough Stuff hydrangea, they have a whole bunch of different names for them and different colors, but this is Tough Stuff Aha. Twirligig, this is a real pretty one. These are all usually around, say, between 3 to 4 feet tall, more close to 3. This one is from Spring Meadow Nursery. They're also doing quite a bit of breeding up in the Michigan area. So look up mountain hydrangea and look at all the different cultivars that are now available that you could find for planting. Little Geisha, Chrissy Sansu, Golden Crane, Plum Passion. They're not going to be your big mop heads, but they have cool flowers, very cool flowers on them. This is one you might have to hunt for. I'm not sure that this one's on the market on a regular basis. This one is called Fairy Tale Bride. But look at the flowers on that thing, how big they are and how beautiful. All right, so blue or pink. Why do we not have blue here in Ohio? We have high pH. Alkaline soils. Alkaline soil binds up aluminum. The higher the pH, the less aluminum is available. We have aluminum in our soil, but it's not available in the chemical composition that the roots can take it up. So soil pH and corresponding available aluminum. Lower pH, acidic soils. Anybody have 6.5, 6 soils? Not too many people around here have that. When we have our compacted, our clay soils, we don't have that. Down in Ross County, up in Northeast Ohio, they can grow rhododendrons everywhere. They're beautiful, but they have a really nice low pH. So if you go up there, you're going to see some blue flowers on these hydrangeas. At higher ranges, aluminum is less available, so the flower is going to be pink. Now, can you change our soil pH easily? Anybody try? Anybody grow blueberries? No blueberries? Anybody grow raspberries? Anybody try to grow rhododendrons? Yeah? Are you successful? And why? How are you successful, Marshall?
Where it's planted.
Where it's planted, right pH, peat moss. Suspect the pH is pretty decent. They like that 5.5, 6.5. Now, every textbook you see for growing plants says this plant prefers 6.5 to 7 pH, right? It all is supposed to be around there. We still grow plants in our 7.4. My volunteers just did a soil test. Our new class just did a soil test, and almost every one of them came back 7.4, 7.5. No problem still growing vegetables, growing any of our regular plants that we grow, but in terms of azaleas, rhododendrons, ericaceous type plants, blue hydrangeas, we don't have the right pH for that. Now we do have good nutrients because the clay holds those good nutrients like potassium, aluminum, and the other nutrients. But if that pH is high, and this is above 6.5 and up, which we're normally in that area, the aluminum is not available for the plant. So the plant will not take it up and will not have blue flowers. So typically you buy that rhododendron at the store, at the nursery, give it to your mom for, Mother's Day, and it's beautiful, right? It's just gorgeous in bloom. And then the next year it just starts to decline, and the next year it declines. The problem, you can adjust our soil pH. Sulfur is a product, soil sulfur, elemental sulfur, put in the soil and it will lower the pH. However, it will continue to want to buffer back up to alkaline because what's below us? Limestone, dolomitic limestone, lots of calcium is down there, and it just keeps coming up, and those ions keep coming up, and we get a high pH. So even though you do it once and get it to the way you want it, you can't keep it low on a regular basis without continual addition of sulfur. And to know how much elemental sulfur to add, you need to do a soil test, because they will tell you to lower it 1 point needs X number of pounds per 100 square foot. To lower it more points, 2 points, it needs even more sulfur. So you really need to do a soil test. Now people guess, and sometimes they're successful, and sometimes they hit it just right, and you put a little more, soil sulfur on to change it. But to really do it, especially if you want to grow blueberries, rhododendrons, raspberries are not so much as touchy, but blueberries, blue hydrangeas, you need to really focus on that soil test and find out what your pH is. Now the other thing, not just the pH, but we have high phosphorus. We've got this chart, and everybody who got their soil test back, pretty much, everybody's line for phosphorus was almost off the hook. It was just so high. It was over optimum. We have a lot of phosphorus because we have a lot of clay soils, because phosphorus is bound up in those clay soils. So we have decent soil in terms of nutrients. But if you have high phosphorus, that also ties up the aluminum. This is soil chemistry. I'm not a chemist, that's for sure. I just know that I repeat this. Don't ask me how it works or why it works like that, but it does. So high phosphorus will also bind up that aluminum. So you've got two things against you here, most likely in Ohio, to try to get that blue flower. So in terms of fertilization on hydrangeas, once in the spring is about all you need. One spring fertilization is going to do the job. It's going to provide new growth. You don't usually want to do it in the fall unless it's dormant. After the leaves drop, when it's dormant, it will take the nutrients in and hold them for next spring. Right now, April, May, that's a good time to fertilize as they're starting to come out. A general purpose fertilizer is easily used. Now, 24 nitrogen, 8 phosphorus, 16 potassium, 24 is high in nitrogen. So remember, you don't want to use too much nitrogen because you'll get a lot of foliar growth. 1530 is high in phosphorus and 01010 is high in phosphorus. So one flower fertilization for a shrub or flower, just a general purpose, is really all you want to use in our area of the state. So you'll see different options. Lower soil pH. It's okay. Does it work for you?
Yeah, it does if you put it on.
If you put it on? You don't leave it in the garage or the trunk of the car? Yeah, I get that. I've done that. Yeah, it will help because it will help to acidify the soil. But if you don't do it every year, the soil's just going to buffer right back up to a higher pH. This one, there's another one, Hollytone, I think is the other one that you might get that's a soil acidifier. It's not really going to be a soil acidifier. It is not going to lower your pH dramatically. It's going to help to get those blue hydrangeas, but it will not, even though it says lower soil pH, in our area, no. If you have a lot of sand, maybe, but not where we have a lot of clay. You're not going to lower that pH. Osmocote or triple 14 slow release, there's a lot of different products on the market that are slow release that could be used. Giving them that one application in the spring, it might last 90 days, 60 days, 120 days. It just depends on what type of slow release product that you get. So slow release can be used, but once in the spring is really all you need for hydrangeas. In terms of fertilizing, and I mentioned this in my column today, early on when you're first starting to grow things, fertilizing is going to help push new growth. So if you've got young trees, young plants that you really want to kind of push along, fertilizing is okay. But how many of you never fertilize your trees? And they do okay, right? They grow. Never fertilize your shrubs, and they grow. Never fertilize your perennials. Yeah, and they grow. Nitrogen is the limiting factor. Nitrogen leaches or moves through the soil. So if you're going to fertilize in our area, nitrogen is needed, but not in excess because of that foliar growth. Turf needs nitrogen to grow. So we spread turf nitrogen out over 4 times during a year because if you put it all on at one time, it's not going to be available throughout the season because it doesn't stick around. It evaporates or not evaporates, but volatilizes, and then it also leaches. It moves through the soil, okay? The question is, what am I calling an all-purpose? A 5-10-10 has all 3 nutrients in it. Triple 12, 5-10-10, 10-10-10, something like that, and follow label directions. All right, climbing hydrangea. Love this climbing hydrangea. It is variety petiolaris. It's not a cultivar, although there are a couple cultivars on the market. Really pretty flowers early in the season, May, June. But the thing is, it's heavy. It becomes a very heavy woody stock. And we had one planted in the middle of all those sycamores, and somebody thought it was a weed and pulled it out. So we have to get another one to put in there because our idea was we get it to grow up and vine around those sycamores, and how beautiful that would be as kind of a centerpiece. So it's very heavy, so you've got to have a good support for it. And when I say heavy, their trunks, anybody have a wisteria? Wisterias get big and heavy. They're like that. They get really woody. They start slow. They do need some support if you want them to grow up. Faster after 3 to 5 years. They bloom early. Their blooms don't last, but then you have this really nice kind of a vine, or it could even be used as a ground cover. And this is the beginning stage of the flower. This is what they look like in the spring, and they do kind of have that peeling bark as well. So this one has been trained on the left to grow along the house. It can grow out though, so depending on how you want to prune it or train it, you can do that as well. Here are your flowers. There is a really nice shot on a wall. And it can be used as a ground cover. And that was kind of what we were going to do, is just kind of have it fill in between the sycamores and then grow up the sycamores as well. But we'll have to do that for another day. This is a cultivar called Firefly, smaller, more compact. And if you look at Firefly leaves, it's a little bit of a variegated leaf to it, so it has a little bit different look. This is a hydrangea that we call, it's a different species. It's called a connoisseur plant. So it's like those those hydrangeas that were in that book, that if I could get a hold of some of those really old ones, that would be cool because those would be connoisseur plants. This is one that you're not going to find very much, but it's a cool plant if you can find somebody who has cuttings. And like I said, hydrangeas are very easy to propagate. All right, then the paniculatas. We'll finish with the paniculatas. So Sechrist Arboretum, they are starting a 6-year paniculata trial because there are so many of them. You know, which ones are good? Which ones are good for pollinators? So they're taking a look at a lot of different variables. They're looking at bloom period, how they look when they fade. Do they have nice flower quality on them? Do they have a scent? Do they attract pollinators? And also foliar and other ratings as well. So they're actually planting out a bunch of these. And you can see this used to be the rose garden up at Worcester. If you've ever been to Sechrist Arboretum, used to be a rose garden, but they took the roses out when they got rosette disease, which is another disease that we're dealing with here in Ohio. And they're looking at all these different varieties. So if you're up in the Worcester area, stop in at Sechrist Arboretum, particularly in June and July when you start seeing these bloom, and pick out the ones you like. Look at them and say, I like that one. And that's why I really advocate for trials so people can actually see what they look like side by side. Or you can come to our gardens as well and see what they look like side by side. Bobo, look at the flowers on this one, even though it's a 2 to 3 footer, just loaded with flowers. It blooms on new wood. Paniculatas bloom on new wood. So when do you prune it? Early spring, right now. Right now is a good time to go and prune before they send out all their new growth. When they bloom on new wood, that means wood that is formed this year. Same holds true for clematis, if you have clematis. If it blooms on last year's wood, like forsythias, like magnolias, like all of our new spring blooming plants that are coming out, you don't prune it until after it finishes blooming. Now, quercifolia is one of those that I never prune. It blooms on old wood. If I did prune it, I would prune it after it finishes blooming because it starts to set its buds in July and August. So all of our spring flowering trees and shrubs set their buds last August, last summer, okay? So a good rule of thumb, even if you don't know exactly what species you have, figure out when it blooms. And does it bloom on the new wood, which if it were a macrophylla, it's supposed to bloom on new wood, but it doesn't. All you have is dead branches, so you can cut it back now. Or does it bloom on last year's wood? Paniculatas bloom on new wood. So you prune it right now if you want to prune it. You can wait until after it finishes blooming if you want to get all the flower heads off of it. But the flower heads are also aesthetically pleasing going all season long, okay? So Bobo fades to pink. This is little lime, so limelight, but this is a little cousin. It is right there behind my dwarf. Notice the foliage is wilting. I don't water my plants hardly during the summer unless it's absolutely necessary. During the heat of the day, they will wilt. This is a very shallow-rooted plant, so they will wilt. They pop back up. If it gets to the point where it's going to be a good 2 to 3 weeks of August weather and it's really dry, I might lay the soaker hose down and water it because, again, the shallow roots. Plus, if I water it, it's going to extend that faded bloom time that I want as well, okay? Another one that's really popular, anybody have vanilla strawberry? This is really a nice one, and I don't look for this one to go away anytime soon, but this one has, so in the back is limelight, in the front is vanilla strawberry starting to bloom. This is an August-September color, just an absolutely beautiful color, and I don't know which cultivar they have at the McDonald's in Springfield, but it's in the curb area between the driveway and the parking lot. It's absolutely gorgeous. I think it's Pinky Winky, but I'm not sure. It's in the worst possible spot it could ever be. I know they don't water it or take care of it, but it is absolutely beautiful in the spring or in the summer when it blooms. I really want to know what variety it is because it is one tough son of a gun. The other thing about this one that I should mention, it also has red stems. So if you compare this to the stems of limelight, they're brown. So this has red stems. This is Pinky Winky. And like I said, this is just, I'm pretty sure it's Pinky Winky, but nice colors and the panicles. This is an old one called Tardiva. Anybody have Tardiva? Anybody have this shape of Tardiva? I've seen this around landscapes. A lot of landscapes have this. It's an older variety. It's just basically Tardiva that's been limbed up into a tree form. So I'm trying something different. My limelights I have out in the front of the house that I've just let go to like 12 feet tall, 10 feet tall. I'm limbing them up now, and I'm trying to develop a tree shape to see how they do. Of course, the flowers will be top heavy and it will be a weeping tree eventually, but it'll be a tree shape nonetheless. So this is Tardiva with really long 12-inch panicles for the blooms.
Does that need full sun?
No. Again, full sun is going to really kind of slow it down. It won't be as lush. So shade is really good for it.
What about the bobo? Does it need full sun or is it shade?
All of them I would prefer. You get better, longer faded bloom color if they're in morning sun and afternoon. They can take full sun. I've got a bed that's probably as long as this room, and all of them are in full hot sun. They don't get any care. They still look really good.
What about full shade?
Full shade, they'll be fine. Maybe not as many flowers, but they still will be good. And in full shade, they're going to last longer in terms of when they start to fade out. And their colors, their height of color is going to last longer too in the shade. Great Star. This one's really cool. If you can find one of these, look at the petals on that. This is Limelight. So again, same thing with Limelight as I said with the arborescens. Pruning in the spring will result in bigger flowers, shorter compact plants. So Limelight can be kept at 4 feet tall easily if you prune it every spring. Not pruning Limelight, like I said, it's 10 to 12 feet tall eventually. And smaller flowers, but lots of them. So my Limelight out in front that I don't prune at all, loaded with flowers. My Limelight that was behind the windows, nice big heavy flowers, but if we get a heavy rain or windstorm, they'd be on the ground. So I'd have to go back out, pull them up, prop them, tie them, whatever. So they will have problems with those stems. So you got to kind of be careful and determine what you want in that particular flower. So with Limelight right now is still going strong in terms of the dry brown flowers. They are starting to blow off. The wind starts to break them off. So some of our paniculatas keep the flowers for a long time. So it can get quite big in terms of the size and also the dead brown flowers, and they blow all over everybody's lawns. This is what it looks like if it's pruned in early spring. A little more compact, large flowers. This is what it looks like if it's not pruned. So you just see the difference in that particular plant. A little lime punch. So instead of 15 feet tall, 12 feet tall, 5 by 5. Look at that one. I mean, that is just gorgeous. And then a Firelight Tidbit. So there's Firelight and then there's Tidbit 3 by 3. Quick Fire, 6 to 8 foot tall, blooms in mid-July. The petals are kind of cross-shaped, so you get a little bit different look, but great for our particular area. So use the chart, because the chart's going to be very valuable to help you make a determination on what you want, what you like. The flowers, if you look down at the flowers, it tells you the flower colors and where they fade. It also talks about light, part sun. None of those say full sun. They can grow in full sun. Know that they can grow in full sun, but know that you're going to possibly have to water if we get into a dry August to keep the roots alive. Know that the flowers will fade faster in the summer when they bloom, and the faded flowers won't look as good as if they're in the shade. And this is why we put all of ours in that kind of semi-shade, a filtered shade underneath those sycamore trees, because we want the best area and the best growth for them. So use your chart. Hydrangea arborescens, the smooth hydrangea, when do you prune it? What wood does it bloom on? New wood. New wood. So you would prune it right now if you want to, or you don't have to. You don't have to. Paniculata, new wood. Prune it now or don't prune it at all. So I like to do mine differently just to show the difference in heights and what you're going to get as a result. Quercifolia blooms on that old wood, and right down here you see old wood. after flowering if needed. Then we get to the macrophylla, old wood and new wood if you're lucky. Mostly new wood, all right? And then your serrata, mountain hydrangea, is gonna bloom on old wood. Paniculata, like I said, on new wood. So does that help clear up that big mystery of when to prune hydrangeas? Because that is always the number one question. But it also holds true, like I said, for clematis. And it holds true for any spring blooming, summer blooming plants. If you have something that blooms in the middle of the summer on new wood, then you can prune it before it blooms. If you have something that's blooming right now, those blooms were developed last August. So if somebody says, well, my forsythia didn't bloom, well, when did you prune it back? Or it might have been killed to the ground by cold, but we didn't have that this last year. So pruning is based on when those flowers bloom, and when in doubt, prune after they finish blooming. Think about Christmas tree growers. Christmas tree growers have to have their evergreens pruned, especially pines, by mid-July, because that is about the time where they start setting the buds for next year. If they prune in the winter months, there will be no new growth on those branches that they take off because there are no buds. They have to prune before they set buds for next year, okay? All right, any questions about pruning or hydrangeas in general?
You might have said it earlier, what's the easiest way to test the soil?
Okay, so soil testing, couple things that are really important. First of all, if you go to the the garden stores, Lowe's, so forth, and you get one of those home soil test kits, you're going to get what you pay for. It's not 100% accurate. It might give you some information, but it's not accurate. If you want 100% accurate, you need to use a soil test lab. There are labs in Ohio, CLC labs in Columbus. Washington Courthouse has, Spectrum Analytical. I usually go to Penn State or Michigan State. I like the results that they give for backyard gardeners. Penn State, and just do a Google search for a Penn State soil test. Penn State, you pay for the mailer. They ship you the mailer. You get a form that you fill out for what you're growing, and if you put on there, I'm growing hydrangeas, they're going to tailor that recommendation to what you're growing and based on your soil. Now, it's going to cost some money. I think Penn State was like $15 or $20, and then it's about $12 to mail the sample. So it will cost you a little money, but I always recommend that you do this at least one time so you have a baseline, so you know what your soil pH is, so you know what your nutrients are. So there are good labs that will do this, and then it's always fun to get one of those backyard test kits and see how much different they are. Because they're not in a lab situation where they're doing the titration and all the right stuff. So I would recommend, particularly if you want something specific.